The nightmare hit without mercy. Whole cities in China's Shaanxi province were swallowed overnight. Streets turned into violent rivers of mud, bridges ripped apart and hurled into valleys, and families forced to climb onto rooftops, screaming for helicopters that couldn't reach them fast enough. In just hours, one of China's most populated provinces was unrecognizable. Highways collapsed into gaping holes, entire neighborhoods disappeared under brown water, and power grids went dead, plunging millions into darkness. More than 39 million lives were caught in the disaster. Parents clutched their children as floodwaters rose inside their homes. Hospitals scrambled to move patients by candlelight, and farmers watched helplessly as fields of corn and wheat, their entire year's income, were buried under silt. Even the national flag sagged, soaked and dragging low in a drowned city square. This wasn't just a flood, it was a full-scale collapse of daily life. And the chilling truth is this: if such destruction struck Los Angeles, Miami, or Houston tomorrow, would you survive it? The disaster in Shaanxi didn't come out of nowhere. Days of unbroken torrential rain hammered the northern slopes of China, fueled by moist air colliding with the steep terrain of the Loess Plateau. Rivers swelled far beyond their banks, and with drainage systems already strained by rapid urban growth, the water had nowhere to go but into the streets, homes, and fields. Yan'an, a historic city known for its revolutionary past, was among the first to be overwhelmed. Neighborhoods vanished under waist-deep currents, storefronts filled with mud, and families scrambled to higher ground with whatever belongings they could carry. In Wuku County, schools and hospitals became battlegrounds against the rising flood. Sandbags stacked at entrances bought precious time, but the pressure of the water kept building. What made this beginning so devastating was the speed. Within just hours, roads became rivers, entire hillsides crumbled, and public squares turned into deep pools. For many, there was no warning, no siren, just the roar of rushing water outside their window. The stage was set for one of the most destructive floods the province had seen in decades, and the nightmare had only just begun. By the time the rain reached its peak, Shaanxi had become a war zone against water. Major bridges cracked under the force of swollen rivers, highways split apart like broken glass, and rescue trucks loaded with supplies were forced to turn back. In Gyeongsang County, a concrete highway section collapsed entirely, tumbling into the valley below. A chilling reminder of how quickly solid ground can fail. Downtown Baoji and Xianyang descended into chaos as underground shopping centers and subway platforms filled like bathtubs. Escalators froze mid-step, while shoppers ran for the exits. Lights flickered, then went black, leaving families stumbling through rising water. Parking garages submerged to the ceiling, dozens of cars stacked uselessly in murky depths. Perhaps the most haunting sight was in city squares, where the national flag, once a proud symbol, dragged low and heavy, soaked by storm winds. Families clung to rooftops waving flashlights, while children cried as helicopters circled overhead. Power lines sagged dangerously before snapping into the flood, sparking in the darkness. For the millions trapped inside this nightmare, the province no longer looked like home. It looked like the end of the world. Behind the collapsing bridges and drowned highways are the stories of ordinary families fighting to survive. Parents carried children on their shoulders through waist-deep water, while grandparents clung to makeshift rafts made from doors and plastic barrels. In Yan'an, an entire neighborhood was trapped on rooftops for nearly 2 days, signaling with white sheets until helicopters finally spotted them. Hospitals turned into islands of desperation. Without electricity, doctors treated patients by flashlight, rushing to evacuate newborns from incubators as generators sputtered out. In rural towns, families rationed what little food they had, sharing instant noodles and bottled water while waiting for supplies that often never arrived. Farmers faced heartbreaking choices. Some abandoned their homes to save their livestock, while others refused to leave at all, standing guard over the animals and fields they had worked their entire lives to protect. In shelters set up in schools and mosques, strangers became neighbors, sharing blankets and comforting terrified children as rain pounded against the windows. These moments of humanity shone through the darkness. Yet for thousands, survival came at the cost of losing everything they had ever built. As families struggled to survive, the province's backbone, its infrastructure and farmland, was torn apart. In town after town, concrete bridges snapped like twigs, leaving entire communities cut off. Rural roads simply vanished under sheets of brown water, and in some areas, landslides buried what little was left. Relief trucks, loaded with bottled water and medicine, sat idle for hours because there was no way through. Agriculture, the lifeline of Shaanxi, took a punishing blow. Corn and wheat fields that once stretched for miles lay flattened, smothered under layers of silt. Farmers dug crude ditches to drain the water, but most of the harvest was already gone. For many, it meant the loss of not just one season, but the collapse of their livelihood for years to come. Livestock fared no better. Barns filled quickly with floodwater, forcing cattle, goats, and poultry into frantic escapes through muddy fields. Thousands of animals drowned before they could be moved. Irrigation canals and pump systems were destroyed, raising fears of long-term food shortages in one of China's most productive regions. What began as a flood had become something far larger, a direct hit to the province's ability to feed and sustain itself. As the disaster escalated, thousands of soldiers and emergency crews poured into Shaanxi. Bulldozers cleared debris from blocked highways, while helicopters airlifted stranded families from rooftops. Schools, mosques, and community halls were quickly converted into shelters, packed with families who had lost everything. Volunteers handed out flashlights, blankets, and steaming bowls of rice to exhausted survivors. In city squares, loudspeakers blasted warnings around the clock, urging residents to move to higher ground. Sandbags stacked at hospital doors and government offices held back the surge for as long as possible. Bottled water and dry rations were distributed by truck and boat, but with bridges gone and roads underwater, many deliveries stalled for days. Authorities worked tirelessly, yet the scale of destruction made every effort feel like a race against time. For the millions affected, relief arrived in fragments, life-saving for some, painfully late for others, and the danger was far from over. What happened in Shaanxi is more than a local disaster. It's a warning the world cannot ignore. Extreme rainfall events like this are becoming more common as climate change fuels heavier storms and longer wet seasons. The destruction in China could just as easily strike elsewhere. Imagine Los Angeles after weeks of Pacific downpours, Miami under the surge of a stalled hurricane, or Houston drowning once again under relentless rain. The collapse of bridges, the failure of highways, and the paralysis of power grids all highlight the fragility of modern infrastructure. When the systems we depend on break, entire regions are thrown into chaos. Shaanxi's floods are not just China's problem. They are a preview of what could hit any nation unprepared. The lesson is clear. Resilience is no longer optional. It's survival. Shaanxi's flood is more than a headline. It's a brutal test of human resilience. Families lost homes, farmers lost entire harvests, and communities were cut off from the outside world in a matter of hours. For millions, daily life was replaced by survival. But this disaster is also a mirror, reflecting what could happen anywhere. If a flood of this scale struck your town, if highways collapsed, power grids failed, and food supplies vanished overnight, would you be ready? We can't control when the next storm comes, but we can control how prepared we are. Stay alert, stay informed, and make resilience part of your life. Subscribe, share this story, and never miss the warnings nature is sending.